All right, so this is the second part. Great Britain leads the way. So we've got our same content statement. Industrialization had social, political, and economic effects on Western Europe and the world. And our learning targets are to describe the origins of industrialization, and then examine how scientific and technological inventions and discoveries brought about massive social, economic, political, and cultural change. So industrialization, it's the process of converting from an agricultural society to one where large-scale production dominates. And this begins in England. It completely changes how work is done, and Britain far exceeds industrialization found in other countries. There is some degree of industrialization in, say, France, the United States, China, but Britain has it far exceeds what everybody else is able to do, and there's a reason for that, and we'll talk about it. So Britain becomes known as the workshop of the world. So why did industrialization start in Britain? Well, the first reason is because uh, Britain had political stability after the after its civil war, and then its peaceful revolution, where it changed over to William of Orange as their new king. They don't have problems. Parliament's established. They have a stable political system. That's not the case in the mainland. When I say mainland, I mean the continental Europe. Think about the French Revolution and how violent it was and how it went through um, long periods of instability. Second is they have available labor resources, meaning they have a lot of people, and they can pull those people from uh, the rural areas to the cities to do the work. They have a lot of natural resources. They have wood, they have coal, they have iron, access to the water. They have an empire which they can draw resources from. They have capital resources. There's a lot of money that's been made from the empire, Canada, India, Egypt, and other places, and those resources can be used to further industrialization in Britain. And then infrastructure. England, because it's an island, it has a lot of waterways, and by water is the easiest and most efficient way to move anything. And so there are a lot of rivers in Great Britain. In many of the cities, actually all of the major cities are built on waterways, and then you can build canals, which are artificial rivers, to connect these rivers. So the factors of industrialization. The first is, as I said, political stability. Britain has a stable government, and it supports individual political freedoms, property rights, equality of opportunity. Whoops, sorry. Now this is George III. This is the king that we in the United States. This is who we rebel against. But if you look at England, it did have these things, or the United Kingdom rather. It had individual political freedom. It did have property rights, meaning people can't just take your things. And then there is equality of opportunity. It is still a class-based system, but there are ways to make a name for yourself or money for yourself, and that is in the colonies. The second factor is labor. There's a lot of people available to work. So, an agrarian revolution is where there are improvements in farming, which means that there's more food available, and this means that you're going to have a growing population. If you're married and you want to have children and you can afford to feed them, you'll have more children. So farming was so efficient that people were free to do other things, like begin the cottage industry. And what do I mean by efficient? Well, they realized that you can rotate crops. They have new crops coming in from the United States that they can plant in Europe, and then they have new ways to enhance the soil, fertilizer, and things like that, which produces more yield. And then England does this thing which is called the enclosure movement. And prior to the enclosure movement, they had these areas in they're called commons, in which anyone could use the commons for a number of things. You could grow a garden there. You could bring your cows, and they could pasture there. What the enclosure movement does is it forces people off of these commons, and it puts up things like fences, and it forces people to essentially lose their job in the country and then be forced to move to the cities. And when they do, they get factory jobs. So Britain also had plenty of people to buy products, and the reason I say this is because Britain has India, which is the second largest country on the planet. By this point, they're in Australia, they're in South Africa, Egypt, Canada. They're trading with the former Spanish. Well, some of them are still currently Spanish and Brazilian um, colonies in Central and South America. So Britain is trading with everybody that they can. All right. Third is Britain has resources. It's the natural wealth of a country. So they have plentiful raw materials. They have coal. It's relatively easy to access right underneath the soil in England. Coal is used to power the steam engines. They also have access to iron, to tin. These are used for manufactured goods. They have access to wool for sheep up in Scotland and other places, and this is woven into fabric. They have access to cotton from the colonies. They buy it from the American South, but they also get it from their colonies in Egypt and India. And then, as I said, England has lots of waterways. They have seaports, and so they can, at a relatively low cost, transport raw materials and finished products from place to place. The next is capital, which is money and property that's used to create wealth. So England has had a banking system which provides loans, able to finance large projects. And by large projects, I mean factories, railroads, coal mines. These are expensive capital investments, but you can go to a bank that is stable, get money at a relatively decent interest rate, and if you're successful, and honestly, most people were successful, you can pay it back. And then trade brought more money into Britain. Prussians were trading with them, Russians were trading with them, Americans, Canadians, all kinds of people. And this meant that England had money that was available for investment and money available to buy products. The transportation system is a well-developed system of transportation to transport raw materials and manufactured goods. So in England, they do things like the Parliament invests in the building of canals to connect rivers. And then right next to these canals, they'll also have railroad tracks when that becomes a possibility. Now, as I told you, before the invention of the locomotive, they still had trains, but they were pulled by horses. Same thing with the canals. Before the steam engines are put on them, they're just pulled by oxen or donkeys. So England has a lot of navigable rivers. They have seaside ports. They build canals. They have railroads. And then there are innovations in textiles. So what industry was the first to make the Industrial Revolution? It's textile industry. So I have a dog, and we have like it's a brush to comb them out. If you have a short-haired dog, this doesn't really maybe apply to you, but if you've ever used that brush on a long-haired dog, and you get this tuft of hair, that's what this is. So this is a bundle of cotton. What you do is you take it and you pull it apart into strands, and then those strands are then woven on this into yarn, and then eventually you'll be able to make fabric or weave it into like carpets or things like that. So cloth making is it's a multi-step process. You take raw fiber, it has to be cleaned and untangled. So you can be cotton or wool. It was mainly wool, but once cotton becomes available because of the expansion of slavery in the American South, and also the availability of forcing the Indians in India to change over to cotton, cotton becomes more widespread than wool. So you have to take the fibers and you have to twist them into threads, and then the threads are woven into cloth. And all of this had been done by hand before, so that meant that clothes were expensive, and this is very time consuming, and it's also very labor intensive. Children would do this job, women would do this job. So by the mid 1700s, British inventors, they created machines that were able to speed up the process. So this is what's called a flying shuttle. And what it does is it takes the place of a person having to feed this line back and forth through all of these fibers. What it does is it literally, it's a flying shuttle. It flies back and forth. So it automates the weaving process. But the problem with the flying shuttle was that it wasn't the problem. It's that it was so efficient that there wasn't enough spinners that could make thread fast enough to feed these things. So a call went out to figure out a way to change this problem. So in the mid 1700s, inventors in Britain, they created what's called the spinning jenny. And this thing can spin multiple threads faster. I believe it was 8 threads at a time at first. But the threads, they could break it pretty easily. And then another British inventor, he creates what's called the water frame. If you notice, this device looks just like this device, and it fell on it, and it's on its side. And there's a story that goes along with that, which you'll watch the video and you'll see. So the water frame, it produced stronger thread, and it's powered by water. it's very large and it's expensive, so people couldn't have these things in their home. You could have a spinning wheel in your home, but you couldn't have one of these in your home. And so what this means is this is the beginning of the factory system where women are going to be leaving home and no longer doing something which they had done with the cottage industry, and they're going to come to factories. These factories at first are tied to the water. So this is the first shift of how people worked. Most people worked on their own property, at their own time, at their own pace, and now you're going to have a factory system, which is a centralized location where you'll have a boss, you'll have times that you're expected to show up, times that you're expected to leave, things like that. So it's a huge change. So it began. They began in Great Britain to build factories, and they could hold these large machines. The factories had to be built by rivers, and then workers would they would go to work. Now you can watch this video. I'm not going to watch it with you, but it has James Hargreaves. He's the inventor of the spinning jenny. Just think of it as review. So what resources did England have? Well, they have a lot of rivers. You can see them all over the place. They have coal. Coal is used to power steam engines and provide for metalworkings. They have wool and sheep. The circles, that's cotton. The green is wool. And cotton is also, as I said, imported from the colonies in India and the Americas. And it comes into any of these ports: Bristol, Cardiff, London, Manchester, Liverpool. The seaports, these are good for coastal trade, meaning you've got factories that are on waterways that can push out their finished goods to the seaports, and then from the seaports they can go out to any buyer. It could be over in India, the United States, Germany, wherever. England also has well-maintained roads. The thing about the roads is it's still slow travel, so the rivers are the biggest source of the movement of goods. And then canals, as I've already mentioned, they're gonna, when I say they, what I mean by that is Parliament is gonna pay for the building of these projects, these infrastructure projects, canals. And then the railroads will come after, and again, Parliament will help pay for these things. So once a locomotive is successfully built that can show that it can do the job of a horse, the railroads will greatly, greatly expand. So this is the size of a Newcomen engine, okay? This is like, it just moves up and down, and this pump is bringing out water. So when I said it was the size of your house or half of your house, this is what it looks like. So hopefully you have some notes. Your notes should cover the first and second section now. Do you have all of the details that you needed? So by that, I mentioned resources. Do you know what I mean by that? Can you list the resources? It's not just coal, it's other things as well. And then what do you need in order to add any new information? Well, you have this presentation. You have the YouTube video to watch as well. So there you go. Watch this video. It's Turning Points in History. It's going to talk about the changeover to factory life. And this is the rocket. This is the locomotive. It's small, but this is the locomotive that beat a horse in a race, pulling a wagon. And so this is what helped propel the locomotive to replace the horse. So what inventions caused a need for more thread from the spinners? Okay, keep in mind, we're talking about not like people doing things by hand. This is what was invented that could produce so much of something and was not able to get in something else. That's what I'm looking for. I want you to be able to answer that. And then one invention meant the need for more thread. Remember, it could produce up to 8 spindles at a time. And then what happened to the cloth production as a result of improvements in the production process? What I mean by that is where did it move to? Okay, so we've got it. It's right down here. So they mentioned the flying shuttle for hand looms. This is still a home use device. It creates wider fabric, faster weaving, but it needs more yarn. So James Hargrave, he creates what's called the spinning jenny. It's still for home use. It does produce more yarn, and it has faster weaving is still needed though. Can't keep up. And then Edmund Cartwright, he creates a water-powered loom. This is a large device, and it has to be constructed in a factory. So this means people are going to leave their homes, which was all of this was done as cottage industry, and they're going to go to a factory. Then James Watt is going to improve the steam engine. The steam engine is going to allow factories to no longer be tied to rivers. And then the British cloth production is going to increase. People are going to be able to buy cotton clothing. And this becomes one of Britain's most valuable products that it exports to everywhere: France, Russia, Germany, the United States, Australia, every place. Great Britain. Sorry, not Great Britain, but India. All right, and that's it. So we'll begin section 3 in a minute.